will subjugate us to their will. And so they're using that as the excuse to say, in every way, super soldiers on the battlefield, artificial intelligence, brain-machine interfacing, whatever, that we've got to get ahead of this technology, or else we're leading to big problems. Another thing, there was a House Foreign Affairs Committee. Did you see this?
No.
A House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing just this last year, 2009. It was held in California. Brad Sherman, Democrat Brad Sherman, chaired this meeting. And now Brad Sherman was picked because he is known for his expertise in the spread of nuclear weapons of mass destruction in the hands of terrorists. But guess what the conference was about? It was about how do we protect ourselves in the future from transhuman terrorists. Mark Stensel, who is a writer for Congressional Quarterly, actually attended this and listened to the House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing meetings, lectures, and he left there and he said, I've never seen anything like it. He wrote an editorial for CQ saying this sounded more like a script for a Hollywood sci-fi movie. They were talking about superhumans, super intelligence, super animals, and how all of this could very soon become literally a lethal force against which we are absolutely unprepared to deal.
Yeah, and in addition to that, they've also used that argument about we've got to expand these technologies before our enemies get the upper hand. We saw this with Project Paperclip in terms of the Nazis being imported in the United States, or Alan Dulles of the CIA saying the Russians will get these Nazis, rocket propulsion scientists, mine scientists that were involved in early MK Ultra programs before they were relocated here. So that's interesting. And the other thing that I was thinking about as you were speaking is that I think why a lot of people aren't aware of some of the things that you're talking about, I think it's obvious people are so bombarded today with the economy, with the fear of not surviving, economic instability around the world. We appear to be on the verge of war with Iran, which could trigger something with China. And so it's interesting to see how much they're preparing for the human species while they have us distracted with all of these other things taking place, and ball games, of course, as well.
Right. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Tom, I guess a lot of people are probably wondering who's behind this. And I know we only have so much time, but I mean, it definitely looks like a very coordinated, organized intelligence, a very dark intelligence that wants to seize control over the species. And I know there's a lot of theories out there, but there are more people opening up to this idea that fundamentally there's something very, very wrong, and we're in the crosshairs of something.
Yeah, and this is where it begins to borderline, you know, the spiritual, the metaphysical, the supernatural. And interestingly, even among transhumanists, there is the growing belief that this technology could literally lead to the opening of a doorway through which we may make contact with an intelligence that we most certainly are not prepared to deal with. And James Hughes is a Buddhist. There is now a Christian Transhumanist Association. There is a Muslim Transhumanist Association. There's a Mormon Transhumanist Association. And it's yeah, and it's because they too believe that this technology isn't just going to alter us, you know, our biology, but it may even change the definition of soul or spirit, and it may lead to contact with something on the other side. One of the leading transhumanists, Nick Bostrom, actually wrote his thesis, earned his prestigious seat at Oxford University, writing his thesis on transhumanist values. And if you go to his website, nickbostrom.com, and just pull the screen down and click on transhumanist values, thankfully he's got his thesis right online where you can read it. He talks about a great deal of things, but one of the points that he makes is that by merging ourselves with animals, we may be able to open into new modes of perception, because animals can see into areas of the light spectrum, for instance, that we can't see into. And so merging ourselves with them could open new modalities, new sensory modalities. Well, why that's interesting is because, for instance, in the Bible, the story is told of Balaam's donkey. And Balaam's riding down the road, but the donkey can see something he can't see, and that's an angel standing in the middle of the road going to take his head off. So it implies, and of course other studies have been done that show that animals sometimes seem to be reacting to something or afraid of something. A dog barking at something that we can't see. Seems like there might be something there.
Right before an earthquake, sometimes we see disturbances with the moves of animals, or
Yeah.
elephants in Thailand a couple years ago.
That's right. But now, at Arizona State University, where the Templeton Foundation has been funding for the last several years, just a huge line of discussions on transhumanism and the future of democracy. ASU just recently launched a brand new project called the Sophia Project. And I bet people will be surprised if they go to Arizona State University's website, click on the Sophia Project, what they're going to find. Because growing out of these transhumanist lectures is the idea now that they want to confirm and they want to make contact. That's what this project is about. And then they define what they want to confirm communication with and make contact with. Angels, demons, ghosts, the spirits of the dead, extraterrestrial intelligence, a universal mind, God. The whole list is there. And once again, who is funding the technology that will lead us to humans 2.0 and that whole transhuman future? It's being funded everywhere, in our universities, in our laboratories. It's a global phenomenon, and there's no turning back from it. So where is it going to lead us? I think Hugo de Garis may have it right. It could lead to an Armageddon, literally a battle between the forces that want to maintain humanity and those who want to destroy it.
There's a lot of concern that we are currently witnessing some sort of implementation of Project Bluebeam as well, with these holograms that are being seen in the skies. For example, the pyramid that was rotating above Moscow recently. We've also seen strange craft in China that don't look entirely real or physical, but to the naked eye, they could appear real. So we've also entered this realm of time, Tom, where we can't necessarily trust our own eyes. Some of your thoughts on this explosion, and I'm not saying UFOs don't exist, but this explosion in sightings that aren't necessarily appearing to be completely legit.
No, you know, I've read about Project Bluebeam in the past, and I also know that they've made great advances in holographic imagery. You might remember some of the funding that was the weapon was called the Voice of God. Studies in cyber warfare and cybernetics, psychotronic warfare. And what is interesting now, you know, DARPA had spent a great deal of money developing a particular kind of microchip some years ago that could be implanted intracranially so that then they would be able to control, let's say, a soldier or a person.
The Rambo chip, was this similar to that or a different?
Well, it may have been similar to the Rambo chip, and I can't for the life of me right now remember the name of it, but it doesn't matter. But what is important is that now the technology is leading to extracranial manipulation of brain waves. And DARPA is investing in this heavily to be able, essentially, to put a Wi-Fi bubble.
So there's no chip required.
No chip required.
No chip required.
Well, and how quickly is this technology advancing? There are games makers right now, that Xbox or whatever, that are putting out games where you just put a little rubber cap on your head, and it's reading your brain waves. These are in the stores now, and they're coming this Christmas again. And you can literally play a game by looking at the computer screen and thinking about it. So we have come so far in decoding the neural processes of the brain, the secret language of the brain, that now we can read the signals, and then we can transmit them remotely to a computer that then puts it in computer language, decodes it, puts it in articulate computer language, so that we're telling a game system what we do or do not want it to do just by thinking about it. Well, if games makers are that advanced, imagine how far advanced the DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Marines, and other advanced cultures around the world are right now in military technology, being able to remotely access and control, stimulate, and manipulate brainwave activity. So, I mean, the transhumanist looks at this and they say, this is so great. The future home. We'll all have our own little Wi-Fi bubble over the top of our house, and we can do everything. We can change channels. We can turn the lights off and on. We can set the alarm. We can say, hey, telephone, call mom, without even speaking. Furthermore, we're creating a synthetic form of telekinesis, because if we're both working the little Bluetooth or whatever of the future that's capable of reading our brain waves, we can look at each other and communicate without ever saying a word. That's real technology that's unfolding right now, and it's so futuristic it's difficult for us to even accept that it could be happening.
The next level of instant messaging.
Yes, that's right. I just sent you a text. Did you receive it? You know.
Ding, you have mail. Well, this opens up another can of worms, if you will. The unleashing of the Pandora's box, the super soldiers of the future. We've been seeing a lot of reports in the last decade, especially in the post 9/11 world, about what these new super soldiers are going to look like. That's why we're seeing movies like Iron Man, Iron Maiden 2. I'm hearing that there's potentially going to be a third. But we are talking about future soldiers. Now, what are some of the characteristics or traits that we're reading about what they would like to develop in the future? I've heard different things ranging from special suits where they can jump over large walls, hit through the walls, and then there's the actual manipulation of course, the human himself, so he has superhuman-like capabilities.
Yeah, well, there again, I mean, you can read DARPA's own budget reports from the past, what has been funded. Certainly they've had an interest in literally rewriting or manipulating the DNA of soldiers. They've already developed Go pills, which they can take. In fact, you know, the Olympics ended just recently, and there was, you know, discussions about several of the people in the Olympics that broke records, and there was questions about whether they were using gene doping. They're literally injecting genes into their system that gives them superior strength or stamina or whatever. So there again, if we can do this in the public, if you can go down to your local doctor and get injected with genetics that will somehow help you to perform, and you can't pick it up in your system because it's a natural process. That's a problem. If you were being injected with some kind of steroids, you know, we can make you pee in a cup and we can pick that up and you can get in trouble. Gene doping is a different thing altogether. Well, the Go pills that the military has developed for our soldiers are essentially that. It'll help them stay awake for very long periods of time. Interestingly, they also have an interest in diminishing the human trait towards harming another human individual, to make them dull to the sense of killing, so that they literally become killing machines who can fight tirelessly for days on end. We're talking about the manufacturing of the Urukai. That's what we're talking about, creating literal killing machines that have been altered genetically for total battlefield domination. But there's also going to be a non-military application of this technology, either by accident or by purpose, and within transhumanism they intend it to be intentional, of course. The Birkbeck Law School, picking up on the House Foreign Affairs Committee meeting, saying we've got to get ahead of this technology because these are going to be future threats on the street, not just overseas on a battlefield. These things are going to be here, and they're going to be powerful, and we have to learn how to deal with them. The Birkbeck Law School, which teaches crime scene analysis, crime scene investigators, recently put out a press release in which they said they're going to have to develop courses for crime scene investigator students in the future to learn how to analyze a crime scene that has been perpetrated by a human non-human. Because let's say that you have a serial rapist, but he's part wolf, or he has some of the genetics of a wolf. Everything about him might not fit our understanding of forensics.
What a freaky possibility.
Our understanding of profiling.
Yeah.
But it's serious enough that the government's actually funding committee hearings on this to prepare for the future.
Wow. It just boggles the mind. And we see movies such as Star Wars, Attack of the Clones, which raises other questions, since we've seen so many things implanted in movies that have later come out in reality, come into manifestation. Could there be some sort of a secret army that they have been preparing for years, grooming for years, underground somewhere with technology that we know nothing about, waiting for that day that they're summoned by the Eye of Sauron, if you will? Could
be. I mean, as exotic as that sounds, we wrote a book, my wife and I wrote a book called The Ahriman Gate, and we wanted the science to be believable. And so we were able to get in contact with a person that works in molecular biology through a friend, a brother actually. And I can't tell you the corporation he works for, but this guy actually holds a patent on a Terminator seed. And he said to me, He said, look, what's happening in genetically modified crops, it's true, and it does pose a public health threat, but he said it is a drop in the bucket. If you were aware, this is what he said, whether he's right or wrong, I don't know, but it sounded believable. And he certainly was in a position to know. He said, if you knew what's happening in Latin America, where the United States has contracts with laboratories, where funding that is beyond congressional review, black budgets essentially, is going for super soldier technology, where these things have been being raised to full maturity. See, that was the debate recently out of the UK. These scientists were saying, we want to know now that we're able to create human-animal chimeras, fully up to 50% human-animal integration in the UK. Would the public be willing now to let us have additional funds to take it to the next level, to start raising these to full maturity? And interestingly, part of their argument was it's already being done anyway. Rogue scientists, Dr. Moreau wannabes, they're already doing this. They're already tapping into this technology. But there is a study right now, it's going on at McGill University. The professor that got it started, his name was Ivan Balaban. And what he did was a simple experiment, but it had profound implications for what we're talking about with transhumanism and genetically altered humans. He took brain matter from developing quails, and he put it into the developing brains of chickens, embryonic chickens, and then he grew the chickens, and the chickens exhibited head bobs and vocal trills of quail. And why that was important was he was able to show that complex behavior patterns can be transferred from one species to another species. And the implications behind that via transhumanism and altered humans means when we start blending ourselves with animals, we're not just going to make ourselves stronger. We could literally start altering behavior patterns in very, very complex ways. Humans could start developing a bloodlust for blood like some animals have. I mean, we could literally be talking about lycanthropes. Is that the most insane thing? But then add to that a new field of science through perfecting organ transplantations over the last decade. We've gotten better and better at keeping people alive. And you've probably heard of cellular memory transfer, where people who are having large organs donated and recipients put in their bodies and they're staying alive are suddenly experiencing memories that are not native to them.
Right.
And complex behavior patterns. They suddenly want to smoke menthol cigarettes and they never did before. Or you know, they've always been very conservative, and all of a sudden they want to get involved with every immoral behavior on earth, right? And there's almost 400 case studies now that are making a connection between the donor organ they received and the person who died and left those organs behind. They're actually connecting that some of these memories seem to belong to this person, or the habit that this guy had. He likes to drink a certain kind of beer and smoke a certain kind of cigarette, and all of a sudden this person that never knew him starts developing the same behavior patterns. And what this is saying is that long-term memory storage may not work the way we've historically said, that there's a certain part of the brain, for instance, where long-term memory storage is held.
That's true.
And maybe it's being held in our DNA, which would provide a longer-term template for that memory to be stored. Well, if that's true, Alex, what's going to happen when we start going into the local genetics lab saying, you know, I've always wanted to be part monkey, you know? It's just the superficial way that transhumanism is looking at this, the utopian idea about the future. Doesn't even scratch the surface on the exotic, complex, unethical, if I can use that term, issues that we're describing. And yet, as you said, designer children are already being made. This week, a child was born in Britain that has 3 genetic parents.
Really?
This week, scientists are now discussing how they think they can make a third helix. Why only have 2 helixes when we can have a third one? And the third one can take control of the first 2. Those ones that God made aren't quite getting the job done. So we'll create one that man can take control of.
It boggles the mind. There's something else, too, that I want to see a connection made here, at least to understand how we got from Nazi Germany to this point. We saw the implementation of eugenics. even before Nazi Germany became a vehicle of tyranny throughout Europe. Eugenics, thanks to Francis Galton, the cousin of Charles Darwin, I believe, already had this philosophy spreading throughout Europe, those that are the higher class and those that are the lower class. And all of a sudden, 50, 60 years later, transhumanism is being talked about on a regular basis. I just look at Wired magazine today. So how did we get from eugenics to transhumanism? Is there a connection here with some of the same powerful either banking families or bloodlines? How did we get from that to where we are today?
Yeah, certainly could be. Obviously, eugenics was, the whole idea was to create a superior bloodline, improve the human gene pool by encouraging breeding among those families that you're talking about, some of the wealthy Europeans and whatever, while at the same time discouraging breeding among, the unwantables. And if we couldn't discourage them from breeding, then for a long time we would simply sterilize them, and we'd write laws around why we were doing it.
Right, just 70 years ago, 80 years ago, there'd be a picture of someone, and based on the size of their jaw, the size of their nose, particular ethnic groups within Italy, these are more likely to be rapists or killers based on how they look, correct?
Right, yeah, that's exactly right. And that's a piece of our history, again, that most Americans don't realize that even up until recent history. I think in the 70s, the last of these laws were actually being taken off the textbook. And I would tell you that people like James Hughes, other leaders within transhumanism, that's why they talk about democracy. They don't have an interest in seeing the kind of selective extermination that was being practiced in Germany. But it still is wishful thinking. It is still going to lead to a classification of haves and have-nots, a classification of people, and the divide between the human races, is going to be deepened by those who have the opportunities of human enhancement.
Now, I want to ask you your thoughts on China. Do you see any specific reason why China's been involved also in this push to expand the limits of what is physically possible in terms of transhumanism? I mean, you just got done talking about organ harvesting, and they've obviously had a lot of experience harvesting the organs of the Falun Gong there. Your thoughts on China today and its part in this?
Well, I'm not an expert on China, and I have private thoughts about why they would be so interested in continuing to invest in our own fiat currency, and how that in the very near future may give them a dominant role in almost setting policy for the way, foreign policy at least, the way it will be written and the way it will be conducted, wars that we may fight. But with regard to their mores, their values, at least from the government side, as it is imposed downward upon the population, is not like ours historically have been, in that they don't value life in the same way that we do. Their one-child policy, their willingness to harvest organs from prison inmates, allow those to be sold in a kind of a black market operation, and they have been investing in technologies that will lend itself to transhumanist aspirations.
We've also forced many church members underground as well.
Forced church members underground. So, what role will they play? I think everybody realizes now that whatever the future is, unless something radically changes, China is going to be somewhere in a dominant role, taking advantage of whatever the technologies are, whatever the currencies are. And I just have I'm not an expert in this field. I have a very strange feeling, though, about what's happening right now with regard to the Titanic of us printing money we don't have, and China continuing to invest in owning the debt of the United States, and how at some point in the near future the walls really could crumble down around us. Why does China want to own so much debt? Well, because it can be paid in territory. Even our own president has said this in the past, that when you only have 5% or 10% of the gold in Fort Knox that you need to stand behind how many dollars you've printed, and China has come in and they bought all of this debt of the United States, and all of a sudden your economy goes to collapse, how are you going to pay China back for what they've invested in? The only gold you got left is territory, it's land. And so you start surrendering large pieces of the United States to somebody who essentially can foreclose on you. Now, of course, that would probably lead to a war unless it happens over a period of time, drip, drip, drip. Give us all enough time to get used to it as it unfolds.
Or if our own government is in on this, that could be the point where the foreign troops are called in, the peacekeepers. If there's some sort of agreement where, well, there's a massive level of debt that's in the multi-trillions, here is this chunk of land in, say, off the coast of Oregon, perhaps, or maybe off the coast of California. Obviously, there's going to be uproar if that were to take place.
Yeah, how it relates to transhumanism. See, you're the expert on this, and as I understand it, maybe it's a secret. You probably will be producing a film at some point in the future on this, and I can't wait to see it. But I'm certainly not the expert that you are on that matter.
Well, hopefully, when I get the film done, it'll shed some light on this and hopefully connect some new dots. But I think a lot of these things that we're talking about are coming together at this particular point in time, where there are many different particular challenges and outcomes. And I think really it's a matter of how we respond to these challenges that'll dictate what the future really holds. I mean, on a philosophical note, I think there's some things that might potentially be predestined, but yet there is still potentially an ability to change some of this if we were to get active, if we were to start speaking out against these things.
Yeah, and to that end, I mean, I have to tell you as an old guy, I'm really happy with some of what I'm seeing happening here in the United States right now. The Tea Party movement, the counterculture movement. See, I remember the days of the hippies. I was a hippie. Can you imagine that? I had hair down to here. And I still recall my buddies, out in the middle of the road, come on, Tom, let's go to Woodstock. Well, this was certainly just a ragtag group of kids, but it started happening everywhere. It was Haight-Ashbury.
You went to Woodstock?
Huh? I didn't get to go, no. But I'm saying I remember them in the middle of the road saying, "Come on," and I couldn't go. Oh, you got to be there. Well, I wish now I would have went. But the point is, it was a cultural phenomenon. It was a grassroots awakening. You couldn't have manufactured it, and it certainly wasn't the established power structures that were making this happen.
No, I don't.
And my entire adult life, I have been waiting for a moment. I've been out there like you, Alex. I've been out there sometimes preaching to I don't know who, wondering if anybody's even listening. I remember when I preached the Religious Broadcasters Convention 1991, and I said, if Americans don't wake up and teach their kids how to think, we will have a dictator in this country within 10 years. I remember when I preached the Religious Broadcasters Convention 1991, and I said, if Americans don't wake up and teach their kids how to think, we will have a dictator in this country within 10 years. Well, that fell like a lead balloon. All these evangelicals sitting out there like, oh my gosh, is he back on that again? Come on, let's get to Denny's. I want to eat some breakfast. So many years I've been waiting. And all of a sudden, just kind of like from out of nowhere, you've got a patriotic movement in this country, and it's happening, and it's spontaneous. And what's hilarious is as the Democrats try to own it, the Tea Party movement, and I'm not just talking about the Tea Party movement, but that puts a face on what I mean by this grassroots movement. They don't want the Democrats to own them. So now the Republicans come in and they put 2 or 3 of their speakers out there on the platform and they try to take ownership of it. And but the movement is still rebelling against that because it's not a one-party movement. It's much bigger than that. It's we have a problem in our government. And if we are going to stop the path that we're on, we better do it now. We may be the last generation and the last hope. Well, for whatever reason, the hippies believed that they could make a difference. If for 1 minute they would have thought about it, they'd have probably gave up. But they were too dumb, if you will, to know that they couldn't make a difference, and they were too energized to believe that they couldn't make a difference. And I'm using dumb tongue-in-cheek. That was what the establishment thought of them. And saying such caustic things. You can be the first one on your block to have your son brought home in a box. They were just in your face with their attitude about what the government had done, getting us embroiled in a war that we never should have been in the first place, or at a minimum, we should have at least gave the armament support and backup to get the war won, not put them there and then start cutting off their funding and making a big political issue. This is what politicians always do, and it always burns me that we put soldiers in harm's way and then we start, doing the political two-step, testing the air. And of course, we've had generals on the battlefield that have come in conflict with our own presidents over issues like this and drew a line in the sand. Well, in any case, I've been waiting. I've been waiting and waiting year after year after year, and there is something now that is happening, and I love it. I don't know. I don't even really know where it's going, but I love the attitude behind it. And what I would tell every young person out there that's listening to this, not to listen to their government right now when they start trying to stereotype you as being unpatriotic because you're willing to stand up and challenge the status quo from the establishment or from the government. That is baloney. Patriotism is exactly what they're doing. Patriotism is standing up in defense. When we broke away from a dictatorship known as Great Britain and came here, that's what we fought and died for. Our liberty, our freedom, the right to say what I want to say. Obviously, restrictions. You don't run into a giant building screaming fire, fire, where somebody's going to get hurt. But I love what's happening, Alex, and it's your generation. To me, it is the coolest thing I have seen in a very long time. I'm glad that people are finally waking up, and they're not going to take it anymore. Well, that's a very good thing.
This is a very unique time to be alive. Instead of looking back at the past, wishing that it was late 60s again, which some people do, I don't believe that in this car of life, in this journey of life that we're on, that we could spend our lives looking in the rearview mirror. We can only go forward. And as we talked about earlier with the potential future, it's like being in a semi going 90 miles an hour and there's a cliff ahead, and unless we turn that wheel and go either left or right, we're not going to avert crashing over the cliff. And so that's definitely how it feels right now. This is actually much more critical than the late 60s.
And thankfully, you have many more tools. You know, in the 60s, not even very many people had a television. Look at what we have now. We've got Twitter, Facebook,
YouTube,
the internet.
right.
You're here doing a television show. So your generation has a phenomenal opportunity now.
It feels like a blessing, to be
changes.
honest with you.
It is a blessing.
What I have and the ability to even do this show here with you know, not a lot of money, it feels like a blessing.
It is a blessing, and I'm glad you're doing it, and I'm glad that actually you've been out there for years ahead of a lot of people your age. You know, you've been a groundbreaker. You've been a way paver, and thankfully you have. And now a lot of others are following you, and I'm glad they are.
Thank you. Well, Tom, thank you very much for coming on.
Hey, Alex.
What can we expect from you in the future? Future speaking engagements, websites that you'd like to promo, things you've got coming up?
Well, people can continue to go to Raiders News Network every day, and if they keep coming back, they'll realize we're not really as radical as we first appear to be, and frankly, they may learn something about the future of technology, transhumanism, where we're going. We're working on another book right now. We're working on a new national conference. Actually, just chaired a meeting in which we got the movers and shakers to agree with us. It's going to be happening out of Branson, Missouri. Be a lot more information forthcoming about that in 2011. Also, there's a new artist movement called Artist Expressway, and they can go to YouTube right now and type in Tea Party National Anthem or something like that, or go to artistexpressway.com and see one of the first YouTubes up there called Freedom. And here again, it's artists who are taking the very issues that you're talking about, but they're not talented to do television. Their talent is singing or playing an instrument. And even the artist community is starting to wake up and saying, this is the talent we have, and we can use this to make a very social, positive piece of commentary right now. And the whole song Freedom is, you're not going to shut me up, you're not going to back me down, and you're not going to take away the future of my child.
Well, it's not just about this new renaissance. I think we're going to doing it one way. Humanity's too unique for that. There's a number of different ways we can express our creativity and imagination, and I think that's exactly what we're doing. So I'd like to thank you again for coming on. Have a good, safe trip back. For those that want to learn more about Tom Horn, Google him, and YouTube and Google, and on the internet, you'll find a lot of information as well. Also check out his new book, Apollyon 2012. Also very interesting stuff. Until next week, I'm Alex Hansen reminding you that the path to the ultimate truth still starts at one place, and that's within. Stay safe. Good night.